Claiming the Capacity to Create with Lewis Carroll. We have been created in the image of God, and theologians have developed different models to help us understand what that means. The image of God, the imago Dei, stamped upon us is the signature and approval of our Creator, authorizing us and expecting us to be responsible and accountable stewards, guardians of God's creation. The image of God has also been understood as our capacity to reason and or our capacity to relate to God, to relate to each other, to love. The writings of C.S. Lewis suggest that the image of God is the God-shaped hole within us. Others suggest that the image of God speaks to our capacity to create. Alistair McGrath writes, one of the most characteristic features of human beings is that they tell stories. J.R.R. Tolkien argued that there was a theological basis for this capacity. We are created with some narrative template within us, which means that the image of God is imprinted and reflected in the stories we create. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were both baptized in the Anglican Church, although Tolkien later became Roman Catholic. But this God-given capacity to create is one that we can see clearly in the life of another Anglican, an Anglican deacon who lived a generation before Lewis and Tolkien. In fact, C.S. Lewis was born the same year that he died, 1898. His name was Charles Lutwidge Dodson, but most of us know him today by his pen name, Lewis Carroll, author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. While his father was a high church archdeacon of Richmond and an examining chaplain of the Diocese of Ripon, young Lewis Carroll became more of a broad church Anglican. And his journey to the diaconate was 6 years long. And throughout that time, he wrestled with the possibility of a call to the priesthood. His bishop, Samuel Wilberforce, son of great abolitionist William Wilberforce, was Lewis Carroll's bishop at the time, and he did not permit his priests to attend theater or opera, and he even warned against the pleasures of enjoying literature and exercise. Lewis Carroll loved going to the art galleries, and he loved photography and travel and socializing, and he loved the theater. And of course, he loved literature. He enjoyed creativity, and becoming a priest at that time may have likely stifled that part of his lifestyle and his personality and his creativity. He also believed that those who had been divorced should be permitted to remarry, which was contrary to the church's teaching at the time, and he rejected the doctrine of eternal punishment. In fact, he believed that all would eventually be saved, all would kneel at the throne of love, including the devil and his demons, which is actually an ancient idea that goes back to Origen of Alexandria, but is not official church teaching. We also see that idea expressed in Celtic theologian John Scotus Regina and the great English theologian Julian of Norwich. Although he saw himself as practically a layman, Lewis Carroll was a deacon who really wanted to be connected to the world around him. In some ways, he was prescient in his understanding of the diaconate as connected to the laity and the world outside the church. He was a deacon when he wrote one of the greatest fantasy books of all time, one of the greatest children's books of all time, one of the greatest English books of all time. While he himself said that the Alice books have no religious teaching whatever in them, he never said that they contained no undertones of religion. Tolkien says, fantasy remains a human right. We make because we are made, and not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. And Alistair McGrath says, we unconsciously tell stories which are patterned along the lines of this great story of creation and redemption, and which reflect our true destiny as lying with God. So, although Lewis Carroll may not have intentionally included religious undertones in his stories. Tolkien and McGrath suggest that it might be there unconsciously, unintentionally. Charlie Lovett, in his book Lewis Carroll Formed by Faith, points out that the Alice books assume more than one plane of existence beyond the visible natural realm. They begin with a fall into darkness, just as the Christian story begins with a fall. They all end with Alice waking from a dream, and in his Easter greeting letter, Carroll himself compared the passage from earthly life to life everlasting to waking from a dream. The words written on the labels of the bottle and that piece of cake for Alice, "Eat me and drink me," are not unreminiscent of the words that the deacon heard at communion. "Take, eat, this is my body." And Alice's fall into the pool of tears, which was her entrance into Wonderland, can be symbolic of baptism. By letting his creative capacities run free, Lewis Carroll deepened his care for creation and all God's creatures. He spoke out against cruelty to animals and published an article against vivisection, explaining that the sin of that practice was not only the cruelty to the animal, but the fact that it deadened the sympathy of the vivisector, of the operator, and desecrated the image of God in which that person was made. And when he spoke to groups of children at Sunday school, groups of hundreds of children, Lewis Carroll was experienced as a man who believed the most important religious messages he could share with children were the loving nature of God and the importance of kindness to God's creation. How do you understand the meaning of the image of God? How do you engage your own creative capacities? And how might your creativity help deepen your care for God's creation and embolden your ministry as a deacon, as it did for Charles Lutwidge Dodson, deacon whom we know as Lewis Carroll?